So welcome everyone to Eli Fulton's final capstone presentation on the world of plastic. And Eli is going to take us through, starting with his proposal back in September. And Eli, that's okay. I'm Al Charlo. I was his capstone teacher, and Jesse Darcy was his mentor. And Jesse played a big part in helping him with the CAD aspect of it, the 3D printing. Eli?
Thank you so much. All right, so today I'm going to be taking you through my presentation in plastic, where I will be discussing custom action figure art and 3D product design. And I just want to give a big thank you to Mr. Charlo for mentoring me through this, and Mr. Darcy for helping me through the hurdles I encountered with CAD modeling. So it all started about 10 years ago, and as a kid I was always a really avid Star Wars collector, and the movies were a really integral part of my childhood, and I knew all of the action figure lines and the characters really well. But one day my dad gifted me 3 action figures that were really unique. I'd never really seen anything like them before, and like having that curiosity, I was compelled to ask him, what are these? And where are they from? I don't recognize them. And then he explained to me that they were made by an artist and that they were uniquely handcrafted, and that they were the only ones like that in the world. And that was just completely mind-blowing to me. I thought it was the biggest thing that someone could make their own Star Wars figures and have the characters they wanted. And then I asked my dad that one life-changing question: can we make these? And that was the start of my journey with customs for the kid. So to explain what custom action figure art really is, it's a product of sculpture, painting, and a combination of different toy parts from other action figures to create a unique action figure. And it's a really involved process. To make one can take 1 hour. It's like a simple part swap or a repaint. And then sometimes you'll have really advanced projects that'll take you 100 hours. And obviously that's inconsecutive. Sometimes you'll spread a project out over the course of 2 or 3 years. So it really depends on the intensity of the character and the requirements of the design. And to create one definitely takes a lot of dedication. You have to sit at your desk and work on them. And it takes patience. But it's a really rewarding result when you get to have it at the end of it. So it's a very rewarding art form. And I'll take you a little bit through what Customs for the Kid really is. It's a website that I run with my dad. I've been doing it for a little over 10 years now. And what it does, the purpose of the website, is to archive the artwork of Star Wars custom action figure artists from around the world. It's a gallery featuring all the art that we make at home, so it'll be like some of my artwork, some of his artwork, sometimes our collaborative pieces. And it's also an educational platform for aspiring action figure artists and fans, because we post tutorials, we have discussions with other artists, we have a show customizing the Clone Wars, and in that show we go through the entire Clone Wars series and we discuss how we created characters from that show. And also, every time we post an action figure, we post it with a recipe describing the parts that we use to make it and how to do it yourself. And aside from being like an educational platform, it documents portions of my Star Wars action figure collection that was made by Hasbro, toy companies. And it's also a directory for people looking to find other artists out there in the world. And over all these years, Customs for the Kid has received plenty of accolades. In 2018, I won Custom Action Figure Artist of the Year and Toy News International, and that was going to be featured at the New York Toy Fair in 2018. We've been featured on podcasts like Rebel Force Radio, and we were also featured at Star Wars Celebration Anaheim in 2015. the action figure customizing panel. That was hosted by Disney and Lucasfilm, which was really cool. And I have done an interview with Fantatrax. They're a pretty popular news platform in the Star Wars community. And Face could feature that a few times. They're also a pretty prominent news platform. Over the years, I've done like a bunch of different things to like stay active in the community. I did judge an action figure art competition with Kyle Newman and Sam Whitwer, the voice of Darth Maul, for I think it was an action figure contest for the Smuggler's Gambit radio show. And they got a bunch of artists that had made characters from that radio show. We got together and judged it with these people, which was really cool. I've been featured on a bunch of podcasts. I've been invited onto the Dorothy Beaver Show with Savannah. I've been on Kessel Run Transmissions, Jedi Business Talk, Custom Action Figure News, and the Expanded Fandomverse. I have to say Kessel Run Transmissions and Dorothy Beaver Show were a lot of fun. You can look them up. I would recommend it. And it was cool to be invited onto these kinds of shows. There's a lot of it felt like really rewarding to see that like not only was I enjoying the work that I was creating and sharing with the world, that other people were enjoying it too. That they were willing to like have me on there with them to talk about it. So as I took this thing that I've been doing for so long and incorporated it into Capstone, I knew I wanted to exceed where I had been previously, and I wanted to push out of my comfort zone. So the questions that I asked myself that really guided my research were, can I generate revenue from the sale of custom artwork? And can I explore computer-aided design principles and learn a new skill? And can I use my creative ability to produce original artwork physically and virtually? So the goals of the project were to establish a strong brand in the custom action figure community, generate revenue, to expand my abilities as an artist, to computer-aided design, and creating a few original models, and I'll be showing this today. I actually have one printed out, so at the end of the presentation you can give that a look. I also wanted to document my work on the Customs for the Kid blog, and have like a record of all the things that I've been doing this year with my custom action figure art, and also to document the work of others in the custom action figure community. I think it's important to create that database and to connect that community. So that was one of the things I aimed to achieve. So when building a business, I was going to have to change my reputation. Because while I was known in the custom action figure community, I wasn't always known as an entrepreneur. People usually saw me as like an independent artist. I was frequently like, receiving comments from fans, like congratulating me on my work. But people didn't really see it as like a business thing. I would usually turn people down because I was a student. But I wanted to change things, and I wanted to see if I could turn it into something profitable. So for the first time, I would say maybe about 2 years ago, I decided to stop declining these people. Every time I would receive an offer, I would take them up on it. And that has definitely resulted in a lot of really opportunities, and it's created a form of income, which is really cool. The majority of the time I've been running it, I didn't want to be overwhelmed with sales, but I had to change all of that. And to associate my name with the product work that I sell, I was going to have to change the way I interacted with my fan base through social media, and also just making announcements. I made a few announcements on Facebook, I believe, saying that I was open for commissions and that I was going to be taking offers from people. So one of the first things I was going to have to do to change my reputation from an artist to an entrepreneur was advertising. So this right here is a little brief advertisement that was posted on Facebook from two of the products that I was offering. It was two separate head sculpts of the Chancellor Palpatine action figure that we made at home. And I wanted to share that sculpt with other people. product, and I gave them an email contact. I said, if you're interested, send me an email at customersforthekid@gmail.com. And very quickly, I became overwhelmed with requests. I believe I got about 20 requests after posting that advertisement. And, not all of them were even about this product I was offering. Some people even came to me and said, I see that you're selling these palpatine head sculpts, but can you make me this as well? And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I could do that. So, it was really interesting to see that my fan base not only had an interest in my product, but had a curiosity, so much so that they were willing to ask me what else I offered and, offer me more chances to make money. It was really a cool thing. Okay, this is a fun one. Just to boost my reach on social media, I ended up posting a stop motion animation that I had made in December. I think I spent a long night, about a week, in consecutively piecing this thing together, and I used parts that I had laying around. I had some action figures, but the starring characters were figures that were actually made at home by myself and my dad. So I thought it was not only a cool display of the hobby, but an interesting display of the artwork and to bring it to life in a really unique way. So I'm just going to play this animation for you real quick. So these figures here are a Jinner, so I believe that one took me about an hour to create. And then my dad made this Chirrut Boy K2SO, which were also featured, and he also created the diorama background. I just thought it was a really interesting way to gauge interest in my fan base. So now that I've taken individual commissions, I want to explain to you what exactly that means. So a custom action figure commission is a transaction between an artist and a client. A client who wants a character represented in action figure form, and an artist who is going to create that action figure for them. And they must decide on the price for which this transaction will be made. The artist creates the figure for the customer, and then once the figure is completed, the artist sends it to the customer, and the artist receives their payment. So it's a fair exchange for money, an action figure. And now that I've opened up commissions, I've had to prepare myself for some of the inconveniences. Not all customers are looking for an ethical transaction. Some people are looking to scam you out of your work. And we had created a lot of friends in the custom action community, action figure community over the years who had been doing commissions and had experienced some problems, like people sending out action figures and their clients saying, oh, it didn't ship to me, I want a refund. When in reality, they had indeed received their action figure, and now they get it for free because they asked for a refund. And I don't want that to be happening, not in my house. So I've put together this contract, and some of the terms that are this is just the front page of it, but some of the most important terms of that contract are a non-refundable deposit of $200 if the project exceeds $200 in price. No deadlines because I'm a student and I have to be flexible. I have assignments. I have social troubles. The life of a high schooler. Can't always be an entrepreneur. And I also organized it so my client pays the shipping, keeps my expenses down. The client supplies the parts, which also keeps my expenses down. And I've contracted $20 per hour for my work. And the client pays insurance for the shipping, so I can't be held liable if it gets lost. And sometimes I'll ask to have them sign for the package when it arrives. So that way I know they received it, to prevent people from saying, I want a refund, I didn't get it. I can say, oh, I have your signature on this contract, and I'm receiving this package. So no. fun one. Back in November, I decided I wanted to share some of my research with fans. So I created a feature-length custom action figure tutorial. And I decided to make like Gregor, who's a character from the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and he was never represented as an action figure. So I wanted to, my dad and I have been talking about maybe him to have him on our show for a long time. And since I wanted to make a tutorial, and it was a project which would outline some of the quintessential parts of creating an action figure, you know, when creating Gregor, you have to kit bash, which is like assembling different parts. You have to use power tools, you have to sculpt, you have to paint pretty much every possible hurdle you could encounter in the process of creating an action figure. I encountered with him. So I thought he was a really good choice for a character to make a tutorial about, because I could outline each trial and tribulation on film for the fans. So posted that up to my YouTube channel. The first step is the character research, getting your photos together and looking at this character from every angle so you know what colors you're supposed to be wearing. Oh, is there like a pocket here? Is there a pouch here? Do they have a seam in their jeans or whatever? You know, you got to pay attention to every minute detail. And to get pictures like this is called an asset. And that is a display of the character from every angle. The animators use it to create the assets for the TV show. So as an artist, referring to these is so helpful because it's the same thing the animators looked at when they created the character. Granted, there can be a few differences between the asset and what you see on screen, so it's always good to like go through the episode, watch it yourself, and take screenshots here and there so you can really make sure you're thoroughly understanding every surface of this character. That's a Rex action figure. I figured it was the closest possible thing to Gregor in his final appearance. So I decided to use that as my base. And as you can see, I'm pointing to that gauntlet. It's a little different than a traditional foam gauntlet. It's actually a foam commando gauntlet. So I used the gauntlet of this, and I decided to mold and cast so I can make a replica of that arm without having to damage the original figure. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works. So kit bashing is the stage. It's probably like, I would say, one of the first steps in creating your action figure. It's finding the parts you're going to need. Like, oh, I think I want an arm from this figure. I want a foot from there and a head from this. And to take these action figures apart is kind of difficult. The joints have like a little mushroom-shaped peg on the inside, so it kind of stays secure. And the plastic is really hard, so you can't really take these parts out. So to soften the plastic, you boil the figures. Which it's a really cool tip that we learned pretty early in the game.
The next step in the process is what we call the boil and pop. So what you do is, if you need the parts of a figure, in this case I'll be needing her arms, right now they don't come out because the plastic is hard, it's inflexible, but if you boil a figure for a few minutes, the plastic starts to soften and you can easily pop apart figures at their joints. So that's what I prepared this water for now. So you're just going to toss the figure in like that, and then all you have to do is wait for a little bit. Okay, so here she is. Just gonna get this oven mitt, and there you go. One arm popped out already. There's the other. It's that quick. It's that easy. It's great. You just gotta turn your oven off. And that's all you gotta do.
It's that quick. It's a really helpful way to disassemble your action figures. And, this is the molding and casting section of it, and you can do this to make like a replica, like those things that I've been selling in advertising. These heads were casted parts. So, and I think this jetpack in her head were also casted.
So what we're going to be doing next is making a mold of this arm right here, and what I'm going to be using is smooth on, and I think this mixture is called Mold Max 14 NV. The ratio is supposed to be 10-1, so, and that's going to be measured by weight. So I have this little scale here where I'm going to be measuring each liquid and then mixing them together in one of these cups and then pouring it into another cup where this arm is going to be molded. While you're working with these, you're going to be wanting to wear gloves because the chemicals are like toxic and I'm pretty sure they're carcinogenic, so err on the side of caution and wear gloves like I am. And it says for part A, what you're going to want to do is mix it thoroughly before you like weigh it and stir it. So if you get like a thick like popsicle craft stick, you can just use that and throw it out when you're done and just stir the solution. And then it says for the part B, you're supposed to shake it. So we'll do that when it comes time to mix it. And it's like a thick consistency. There's like a layer of like sediment on the bottom that you're going to want to get through when you stir it. And just try to get it to an even consistency before you pour it into the cup. And I think that should be okay. So I'm just going to pour some of this out into this little cup. That should be roughly enough to get the job done. Now you're going to want to weigh that on the scale. I think right now it's set to mass. It's measuring at 35.8. So you're going to want to get 1/10 of that for the part B. So shake that. So 35.8, divide that. So you're going to want about 3.58. 3.6, there we go. Okay. So now I'm going to pour that into this. And then mix that. And then I'll have to pour it into the basin to make the mold. So once you have your mold stuff mixed and you have your figure set up, you can start the molding process. And what you're going to want to do is just pour it really slowly into the cup, and you're going to want to keep the stream of mold liquid as thin as possible so you know that there's no air bubbles getting into your mold that could disrupt the final piece when you run it in resin. And you're just going to want to keep doing this. It's going to take forever and it's going to suck, but you got to do what you got to do so you don't get any air bubbles in your final piece. And then once you have the mold completed, you're going to want to let it sit for about 4 hours while the mold cures, and then you'll be able to take it out and run it in resin. So after letting the mold sit overnight, I was able to remove his arm from the mold, and now we have a silicone little block here, and you have a negative impression of the arm. And what we're going to do is we're going to take resin, an Alumilite resin, and we're going to fill the mold and let it cure. And then once it cures, you can pull out a perfect replica of the piece you're trying to cast. So what I'm going to be using to cast this is Alumilite resin, and this stuff is a 1-to-1 ratio by measurement, not by weight like the other one. You just measure the milliliters, and it cures in 7 minutes. So you kind of have to work quick. What you have to do is measure out equal parts in each cup and then quickly pour it into the other cup, and you need to stir it really quickly with like a chopstick is fine. And do wear gloves because the chemicals are really volatile. Like the smell of this one alone will deter you from wanting to touch it with your bare hands. So you're just gonna want to shake them thoroughly before you start. So I'll do that now with the part A, and I'll just pour out what I'll need. And I'll stop that at about halfway to the 5 mark on this measuring cup. I'll go to 5. And you're going to shake your part B. And you're just going to measure out an equal amount in the other cup. So I'm going to want about 5 mLs. And that looks to be about even. So what I'm going to do next is take our little handy dandy chopstick here. And I think this one pours better. So I'm going to pour it into the part A. And I'm going to mix this very quickly. It's going to get hot. That's something that's important to know. It gets hot, so you're not going to want to touch it because it might burn. So just don't touch it with your bare fingers. Wear gloves and all will be well. Yeah, even now I can feel it. It's getting warm in the cup. And what you're going to want to do when you pour it into the mold, and the mold should be soft. The softer the mold, the easier it's going to be to get it out. This is like a new mold, so it's kind of squishy. But if it's an older mold, you'll want to like microwave it for a little bit before you use it, and it'll just get the squishiness a little. It'll make it softer and easier to remove the piece from. So you're just going to want to pour in a little bit of resin. You're not going to want to fill it, just enough to like swish around inside the mold and like coat the walls so you don't get any bubbles and like the visible sculpt. You can get like a little pokey tool and like move the resin around. Make sure it gets into all the crevices and eliminate as many air bubbles as you can. And just feel around in there. Like there's fingers on this, so I'm going to try to get all those fingers to come in nicely, capture all the detail. Again, going with your pokey. Every time you pour in more resin, you're going to want to poke around and make sure you get all the air bubbles out, because air bubbles are the enemy. They're going to weaken your cast, and also you run the risk of just having a mold or a cast you can't use because there's a bubble in it that like ruins the appearance. So get like this is just like a old dental tool, and you can just dig around in there and make sure, oh, see, look, it's already starting to set. Can I make it? Probably not. Yep. And that's done already. It goes quick. Yeah, look at that already. And you're probably just going to want to let that sit in the mold for like a good 10 minutes. This sets in 7, but 10 should, just to make sure it's like all dry. And so yeah, in 10 minutes, I'll take this out and hopefully it'll work and I can put it onto our Gregor body and it'll all look all good. So I let the resin dry for about 10 minutes now. I think it's ready to be taken out. It when you tap it, it makes a hard noise and it doesn't dent. It's not squishy or plasticky. So let's see if we can take it out of the mold. What you're going to want to do is like find the bottom of the mold and kind of like separate it and like kind of squeeze the piece out if you can. If you have to, you can just grab it and pull it out of the mold. I think those fingers are really in there. Okay, there we go. So this is a perfectly casted arm. I don't see any bubbles in there. I think all in all, it was a successful cast. And now what I'm going to do is replace this gauntlet with this new one that we just made, by the way, which we made without having to damage this figure, which is pretty great.
That was a perfect cast. First try, which is pretty cool when it happens. It doesn't happen all the time. Because, you know, sometimes people get bubbles with perfection. It's not much help.
Yeah, detail at the end, huh?
Yeah, it's so tiny. So yeah, these are the products that I use that I told you about. The Mold Max 14MD, the new Luminous RC3. Those are the products that I'm comfortable with. But Smooth On also creates a resin. I noticed that the resin from Smooth On that I have dries very quickly. So it gives you less time to work with that resin. It gets a bubble a little bit. So it could lead to imperfections in your final cast. And this portion, after you've assembled your action figure with all the parts necessary, you can modify it with power tool.
All your parts put together, like all your parts ready, you're going to want to prep them, and you can do that with a Dremel. And it's a power tool. It's got like a rotor right here. You can put it's got interchangeable attachments. For this figure, we're going to be using a nylon brush, and what this does is it like sands through the plastic really nicely. You can almost like negative sculpt with it, and what's nice about it is it's not too dangerous. Like if it's spinning really fast and it scuffs your finger, you're not going to feel too much, and you just got to tighten it like this. What I would recommend, if you're going to get yourself a Dremel, get one that has a cord, because the ones with the batteries, you have to recharge. And the worst thing is if you're in the middle of working, you're in the flow, and then your Dremel runs out of battery and you got to wait for it to charge. So do yourself a favor and get yourself a Dremel that has a cord that you can plug into the wall and just use however long you need to use it until you're done. You've got your proper attachment in and your figure's ready to be Dremeled, you're going to want to get some eye protection, because when you're using this, sometimes hot plastic can shoot up and like get you in the eye, and it really sucks because it hurts, and you know, you could really just mess up your eyes, and as an artist, you're going to need your eyes. So do yourself a favor. Wear goggles, be safe. And if you're a child or a kid and you're young, you're watching this and you wanted to do this, I would really recommend you have a parent help you with this or watch you do it. Do not do this on your own unless like you really, really know how to use this tool. Just please be safe, be cautious, have a parent there, and wear goggles. Don't hurt yourself. You can see in the picture, he's got a shirt on. Rex has armor. So step one, we're going to sand away the armor. And there's just like a little power dial. It goes from 0 to 10. And I like to work, if you're like doing sanding with like a soft plastic like this, probably like a 6 or an 8 will do the trick. If it's too slow, it's not going to do anything. And if it's too fast, you're probably not going to have like good control over it. So like a 6 to 8 on the power, and it is going to be loud. Just be ready for that. Yeah, I could just jump right in and start sanding. An important thing to note while you're working is that you never want to force the Dremel into the figure. You want to glide over the surface, because if you dig too deep, you're going to have to go back later and sculpt it in. So don't take away too much, and work in like almost little like negative layers. Like you take away a little bit at a time until it looks the way you need it to look. And yeah, if you take away too much, you're gonna have to add it in. Not fun. It adds a whole lot more time because you have to sculpt it and then you have to wait for it to dry. So only take away what you need to take away, and as you go, do your best to try and keep the surface smooth, because if it's uneven, the Dremel won't move over it as nicely as you would want it to. I get that it might appear a bit alarming that he has a giant hole in his chest and in his back, but what I had to do to prepare him for the sculpting phase was to remove all of the mass, like all of the stuff that was there to make room for the sculpting phase. And, you know, this torso is hollow, which I did not expect. But, you know, you still have to take away what you have to take away. And once we fill this, we're going to be patching this with Aves, with Aves Fix-It Sculpt in the sculpting phase. So don't worry about that so much. The face, having to get rid of all of Rex's facial hair was a bit of a challenge. And instead of using the nylon brush, which was good for, you know, shaving away the shoulder pads and the chest armor, it was better to use a green smoothing stone to like really do some of the fine detail sanding on his face. And as you can see, I had to change his jaw structure, and his upper lip was completely obscured, so I had to bring that out of the sculpt. And I think I did go in there with like a razor blade to redefine the lip. And that's pretty much what you're going to be doing in your sanding phase and preparing this figure for the sculpting phase. Alrighty, so what's happening now is the sculpting phase, and what I'm using is some Aves Fix-It Sculpt, and it's kind of like a light gray sort of doughy sculpting medium, and when it dries, it's kind of like a soft stone. It's really good for sanding, it's really good for smoothing out a surface. And right now, because, you know, he had that giant hole in his front and his back, what we're doing is we're filling it with Aves, and then you're going to want to use, I like to use a wooden sculpting tool because it retains the water. And when you use water on this stuff, it softens it. Like, it cuts through Aves. Like a wet sculpting tool will cut through Aves Fix-It like butter. It's wonderful. So what you want to do is just dip it in the water a little bit and then just get a little bit of the excess off. And then just smooth the surface. Smooth out all of the edges into the rest of the body, because the more you smooth while the sculpting material is wet, the less you're going to have to do later once it dries. Some people like to sand. I like to just get it all smoothed before I even get to that point. So I'm just going to make sure this is all looking nice, and the edges all blend into the form nicely. I'm just going to push some of the excess over here and try to form the open neck of the shirt. And one of the keys to like sculpting nicely is to sculpt in layers. If you go a little bit at a time and like think of your sculpt in layers, almost like you have like your base layer, then you have your primary forms, and then like your primary forms are rougher and more just to like set like a base, and then you have your secondary forms, which are a little more detailed, and you want to do that in your second sculpting run. And then in your third sculpting run, you're doing like tertiary, like super detailed forms. And if you think of your sculpt that way, you're going to have something that looks a lot more like well thought out, and it's going to look a lot cleaner, because instead of doing it all at once where you could like bump something or mess it up, you did it in layers, and you did it as like a step process. And that's something a lot of sculptors tend to forget. Some don't, some do. So I figured I'd just put it out there. Sculpt in layers with primary, secondary, and tertiary form. And now that the front has been established, now I could move on to the back and smooth all of that out. So I'm just going to get my tool wet and blend it by just like using the blade, like the sharp end of the tool, to push the material around, and then use like the side of the tool that's wet to blend in smooth. So now that I have all the primary forms set and smoothed out, I'm going to start with the secondary forms. So in the reference picture over here, you can see that he's got more of a built-out chest, so I'm going to do that now. I have a little bit of Aves in my hands that I can work with. So this is what I have right here, and what I like to do for the sake of like symmetry is take how much mass I think I would need. So hopefully this should be enough. And then what I'm going to do is just roll that up into a nice ball, and then I'm going to cut it in half. So that means that the amount of mass that I would have on one side of the sculpt is completely replicated on the other, because they have the same amount of mass. So I'm going to just put this down and find the halfway point and just cut it. So now I have two pieces of equal mass that I can apply to the figure. And I'm going to apply the first one right here. And I'm going to try my best to follow the pectoral anatomy here and make sure that the forms that are on the figure make sense and they're like plausible human anatomy. Like you could look at it and say, yeah, a human body could create a shape that looks generally like that. And once you have the forms put on, you're just going to blend into the sculpt. And this is when primary and secondary forms are going to come together to make the final sculpt. I think his chest sculpt is simple enough where I might not need tertiary, like high detailed forms. It might just be primary and secondary. But nevertheless, you still want to make sure it's all perfectly smoothed, because you just don't want to leave things up to chance. Make sure every tool does everything that it can until you're done using it. And I'm going to try to blend the pectoral forms up in this direction, because with the flow of human anatomy, it kind of flows up and outward. So with the pectorals, you're going to see that they are going to blend this way, and then you're going to do minimal blending on the line below them. And then you're just going to want to press this line in, just so the two bits fuse, so the Aves fuses with the surface below it, but you don't want to blend it too much, or you're going to risk the bottom completely copying the top. So you want to apply the correct amount of blending and the correct angle at which you press in on the sculpting material with your tool, so it all looks correct in the end. Right now the forms are a little strong. I could probably sand that later, but I'll try to do what I can now while the sculpting material is still wet, because you can't sand this until it dries. So I'm going to try to do as much as I can in this phase of the process. And that is more or less what I'm going to try to get the other one to look like. I might blend it a little bit more up here, but that's the basic idea of what it's going to end up looking like.
Tools and mediums that I like to sculpt with. So this is Procreate, and there's pros and cons to each medium. The Aves epoxy sculpt is easy to sand, and it's good for layering. It's good to like base your figure in because it's sturdy and it dries almost like a stone, and it cuts clean when you're working with it. It's almost like a soft dough. But the issue with it is if you make like fine points or tendrils with it, it will dry brittle. So that's why I like to use it for flat surfaces that are tight for the body and use it strictly for layering. While Procreate is it's a sculpting medium that dries with a rubbery kind of consistency. So, you know, if you drop your figure, it happens all the time. I'm clumsy. I got my things. And, you know, you're not going to have to worry so much about a little tendril breaking off if you made it out of Procreate as opposed to epoxy. And, you know, it has a rubbery finish. It smooths pretty well if you smooth it before it dries, like the wooden tool. It dries faster. Procreate, I would say, dries in 1 to 2 hours. While AIDS epoxy sculpt, you might have to wait for 4. So, you know, sometimes when you're trying to be more efficient with the creation of an action figure, you want it to dry quickly so that way you can just move on to the next step. Because you have to sculpt in layers, and if you try to work on an action figure while it's still wet, you run the risk of like pressing a thumbprint into it or like completely like squishing a thing that you sculpted out of the way. It's bad. So you want things to dry before you proceed, and that's why I like to use Procreate because it dries quickly and I can just move along and get it done. So this is the painting phase, and you know, I'm going to walk you through like each step of how I like to paint. I'm going to also go over a few of the techniques that I use when I paint.
Paint your base coats and how to layer your paint so it has more dimension, and then dry brushing, maybe some stuff about highlights, and I'll show you all the ins and outs of how to do a complete paint job. What I'm going to start with is the base of the skin tone, and that is what I'm going to be using on the arms and maybe the neck. Just I'm going to see how it looks on the arms, and if it looks a little different, I'll match it to the neck too. So I took my 2 darkest colors that I showed you before, the Dwarven Flesh and the Suntan Flesh. I'm just going to shake these up. And then right here on my paint palette, I'm just going to put a little bit of that. And then a little bit of that. And then you just get a nice little fine-tipped paintbrush. I like to dip it in water, keep the brush hydrated. If it dries out, the bristles of the brush tend to fray a bit, and it doesn't really have that same accuracy when you're painting on a surface that, you know, you need to have an accurate paint job with. So you're just going to mix your 2 base tones together. It's really important to use a lot of colors when you make your skin tone so it doesn't appear flat once you put it on the figure. So let's see. Leap of faith, first paint stroke. And there you go. That's the base color there you're seeing. And it looks a little dark, but that's exactly what a base coat is supposed to look like. If your base color is the same as the finished color, then it's going to look really weird when you finish it, because you need to have your base color be the darkest, because it's what you would be seeing in the shadows. This paint in a lot of the areas is going to end up being covered, but it provides an undertone which reflects through some of the other paints that will make it appear more natural in the end. Now that I have my base paint color applied and now it's dry, I'm going to start the dry brushing process. And one thing you're going to need to know for the dry brushing process, you're going to want a brush that's good for dry brushing. Notice that this brush is messy. It's probably seen better days. So when you use a brush for dry brushing, you're going to want to use one of your older, more messed up ones as opposed to your new, crisp, sharp, pointed brushes. So for that, you're going to need a paper towel, a paint palette, maybe, and you're not going to want to use water because that would defeat the purpose of it being called dry brushing. If you're going to be using water, You should be using it for base coats, not for your dry brushed highlights. That little drop of paint right there should do the trick. What you're going to want to do without dipping your brush in the water, the water's a no-no, is take a little bit right there and then wipe off the excess on paper towel, like so. And then on the figure, you're going to want to just gently dance the brush across the surface. And as you can see, what that's already doing is creating some pretty serious contrast between the areas that are raised and the ones that are sunken in. Gives it a lot of depth. What you're going to notice is the paint kind of has like a powdery appearing consistency, and that's good. That's exactly what you want. That means you're doing it right. If your paint is streaky and it's falling into the cracks, then that means your brush is too wet or you need to wipe off your excess paint. And when you have cracks that go sideways like this, you're going to want to go against them so the paint doesn't get in the crack. So along this line, I'm just going to brush the paint up. Now we have a gauntlet that looks weathered, and all we had to do was paint it black and then dry brush the white over. So now that I have the gauntlet paint job done, I'm going to put that wash kind of burn mark on it. So what I'm going to use is this solid black paint just watered down, but what's best to find is a wash. This one's all dried up. It doesn't have any more, so that's why I'm going to have to make my own with this. But if you're shopping for materials on your own, I would recommend you get a Citadel wash to actually use, because there's something about using the real washes. There's like a transparency to the paint that you're not going to find by just making your own wash at home. So you're just going to take a little bit of paint. You don't need much because you're going to be watering it down a lot. You're going to take some water on your brush and just drop it into the dish. And you stir it until it has like a watery sort of transparent appearance. And let's just test it out. So when you paint it, it looks kind of watery. This is what we're looking for. So just get the excess off your brush. And now I'm just going to start stippling that on. There's some really fine detail painting, which isn't easy. So what I like to do first before I do anything like that is to draw an outline. So I have my reference picture up to my left, and I'm just going to take a pencil, draw an outline, and then paint everything within that outline. It just gives me a good guide while I work. So I'm going to start with the top of the burger bun right here. So we kind of have a rough sketch of a burger going on here. And then there's like the 3 triangle shaped things that come out up here. I don't know if they're supposed to be fries or a wrapper or whatever, but they're gonna start at about this point I'm seeing in the picture, and it goes to about this far. So I'm gonna draw that line out. And this third one looks like it might be a bit of a challenge. So we have the top line, and then it looks like it comes in 2 times. And out for the final line. So I believe this is how it should all look. Obviously, that's going to be filled in with color next, but that's a good starting point to help you gauge how things are supposed to look.
After I finished sketching, I just painted in all of the colors and details. And yeah, after figuring out how to do a regular action figure, let's switch it up. Let's get into computer-aided drafting. This was a big change for me. I'm used to working with like a tactile medium that I can touch and manipulate with my own fingers. But with CAD, there's a degree of separation between me and my work through the keyboard and my little mouse, and the little bit attached, which was a learning curve for me. I mean, it really was a learning curve. The upsides to using CAD modeling in custom action figure art is that I can produce action figures and action figure parts very quickly in large numbers, because with a 3D printer, I can just take a model and Control-C, Control-V, 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 print, and then in about a few hours, I can have a replica of a sculpt that I only have to do once, that I can print however many times I like. And it's also gaining in popularity right now. I think because a lot of these technologies are becoming a little bit more affordable and accessible to the general public. And, I think CAD is a good route for me because it's going to save time for me. I don't have to spend time sculpting a figure or part each time someone asks for it. I can just sculpt it once digitally and then sell them print each time it's asked for. And it's affordable and it's lucrative and it saves time. So it's just the perfect mix. So what is CAD? Good question. I didn't know what I was doing. I needed a teacher. Thank you, Kyla Wright, for that very valuable input. And that's where Mr. Darcy came in and helped me out with how CAD worked. And computer-aided design and drafting is more commonly referred to as CAD. It's a form of computer technology that assists in the drawing and technical drafting of a product. And with CAD, I aim to create 3 models of varying difficulty, learn the fundamentals of computer-aided drafting software, and prepare myself to pursue the future in industrial design. And, finding an application that worked well for me took a lot of time. I went through a few different things, and there were a few that I clicked better with than others. I think I tried Mesh Mixer once. I didn't quite get it, but I'm sure if I went back now, I maybe could. I didn't at first. So the 3 that I ended up settling with were Tinkercad, which was introduced to me by my mentor, Mr. Darcy, and I ended up finding Blender with my dad on my own, and I used that to create some of the more advanced mesh models later in the year. So Tinkercad is excellent for learning the fundamentals. They have an excellent tutorial program. The moment you open the app, they offer you a tutorial and walk you through each function of the application. So you learn exactly how it works. And what's really nice is that Tinkercad is very similar to other computer-aided design engines. So if you understand this one, you're going to have an easier time understanding the other ones. So having a tutorial helped me in many ways. One of the downsides to Tinkercad is that it's a little less detailed in that they only offer you primitives to sculpt it. And a primitive is a shape that is predefined, like a sphere or a cube, or a pyramid, a cylinder, or like a gallery of shapes that you have to work with. And what's limiting about that is you can't create an organic form. You have to use what they give you, but you can get creative with it. If you want to make something a little more geometric, like your droid, or like an accessory that's kind of got like a futuristic shape to it, having a geometric engine to sculpt with isn't the worst thing. So I actually did find a use for that, and I made my first simple model using Tinkercad MakerBot is a 3D scanner. I believe we have one up in the tech lab, and what it does is it can replicate a model using this little rotor right here and 2 laser apertures and a camera. And there's an algorithm in this thing which can detect the distance that a laser meets the contact with the object you're scanning in the scanning bed. And it produces a point cloud, like a mesh of points that resemble your object, and then it connects all of those points and forms a 3-dimensional object that replicates the real object in real life. And I use that one to help me with Merrick and the approximate the characters that I produced. Blender is a freeware application, which is great. I don't have to spend money on it. And it's got a really complex user interface. It offers a lot of sculpting tools and shortcuts that other freeware applications tend to leave out. And it also offers animation software, so you can bring your creations to life. I haven't really messed with that yet, but I think it's a really cool thing to pursue someday. And this was the one that I created in Tinkercad. It's a simple model. There was a character in Solo. She was a singer in like a crime boss's club. And her headdress, I thought was a really striking piece. So I replicated it in Tinkercad. And this is the final model that I had produced in Tinkercad. And I actually printed it out. And I have it down there for you all to see once my presentation is over. And because it only offered simple shapes, creating this wasn't too difficult. And you can get creative with primitives. I used a cylinder to create this disc, and then I used like a cube, and then I cut half of that cylinder away. And then things like this, these little lightning bolt shapes are actually just 3 cubes that I stretched out and stuck together. And that's just a cylinder that I cut a hole into. So you can get really creative with just primitives, and you can really kind of flex your creative muscles and figure a way to make something more complex out of simple shapes. So for my next model, this one was going to be a little more difficult, and I wanted to make Lady Proxima. She was a crime lord that was also featured in the film Solo Star Wars story. And I wanted to try organic textures. I wanted to try modifiers like mirroring. So I created a sculpt out of monster clay, and then I used that MakerBot digitizer, and I scanned her into digital. And then I went in and I patched her up, and I mirrored her, so that way she would be a complete character. She doesn't have any of her jewelry or hair yet, because I wanted to make that out of real metal, real hair, after I printed it. Kind of like deck her out with all of her accessories when she's fully printed. And for my more complex model, I made Merrick, which is found in Embo's little sidekick. It's a little wolf that follows him around. And I implemented more complex tools for this one. I used things like masking and slicing. I think you're going to see real quick. Just zoom in, you can see me sculpt a little bit on the face here. I believe first I smoothed out the cheekbone and the brow, and then a little bit in the lip here. It's a little rough. And I went in with the smoother, and I just smoothed out a clean surface. And using a mask like this isolates areas of your file so they can't be modified. So since I only wanted to focus on the face, I masked the rest of the model so I wouldn't accidentally mess something else up while I was focusing on a certain region. And when I print my models, I use the longer orange 3D printer. This is the one I have at home. And there are 2 types of 3D printing, and they each have their upsides and downsides. So they have a filament printer, like the one we have here at the Tech Lab, and that is a roll of plastic filament which is heated and then placed in a line, and the object is generated layer by layer on a print bed with a little aperture that deposits this little plastic thread. And it goes on for a few hours, and you can watch the thread go around each time and layer up until your object is fully printed. And then they have SLA, which is stereolithography printing, and that works by using a UV-sensitive resin, which you pour into to a basin, and then inside of the printer, under that basin, there's a little pad that has UV lasers in it, and the lasers shoot into that resin in very specific ways at specific points to generate the shape of each layer. And then the print bed lifts up, and you can watch as your model is being pulled out of the resin. Really cool to watch. And if you're going to be 3D printing, these are a few of the things you're going to need. You're going to want some longer 3D print resin, UV sensitive. I like to mix it with tenacious 3D printer resin, which aids in durability. Because the issue with the longer resin is that when it cures, it can be very brittle. So to mix it with tenacious, it's kind of like a rubbery resin. So mixing it in causes your final print to be a little bit more flexible and durable, and less likely to snap or break if you drop it. And there's just a few other tools you're going to want, like a drywall spatula, because the print is pretty stuck onto that print bed, and you're going to want to use that spatula to pry it off. And then you're also going to have some like resin liquid like all over your model, and the isopropyl alcohol is really good for breaking it down. So if you pour the alcohol into the liquid resin, it causes the liquid to kind of like melt away, leaving behind the solid print. So it's a really excellent way to clean it. You're also going to want a filter and a funnel, because longer resin ain't cheap. It's not cheap. So the resin that's left behind in that basin, you're going to want to save. So you'll take a filter and a funnel, and you'll funnel all of that resin that didn't get used back into the bottle. And you want to use a filter just in case there's any bits of the print that fail. If there are any like solid chunks floating around in that resin, you don't want that falling into your bottle. Pour that out, and your printer, that print bed kind of presses into the UV screen. It's gonna it expects to make it complete contact with that screen. So if there's an object, just a crumb, something in between, your printer's gonna make a real ugly sound, and it may just not work again. So to prevent breaking your printer, just filter your resin and make sure you don't have any debris inside of the print area. Some of the future investments that I want to use, that I want to take advantage of with the money that I make already, is a pressure caster. And since I invested in casting and trying to make some money in the casting market by replicating my sculpts, I feel getting a pressure caster could greatly improve my efficiency, because a pressure caster kind of pushes air into the chamber, and that forces bubbles and imperfections in your resin to come up out of the mold. And it prevents waste of your material, and you can put multiple molds in there at once to cure. So it's time efficient, and it's also it's a lucrative thing. It's worth investing in, because I could create so much more, so much faster with this kind of tool. This rate, I just have hundreds of thousands. 200,000 units already, we're going well on the way. After a dedicated year to Capstone, I am proud to say that I have reached my goals. As of May 2021, my work has yielded $1,416, expenses included, and I have produced a feature-length tutorial to share my knowledge with the community. I've made several sales, increased my social media presence, and all the while I've learned a new skill, CAD modeling, thanks to Darcy and some of my own research that I conducted at home. And to be able to pursue a goal that I had set for myself and then achieve it on my own terms has been a great honor and an absolute privilege. So I do want to thank Charlo for offering a course like this. It's a really great opportunity, and as always, the force be with you.
I had no idea, as your mom, that you were doing all this. Like, I had no idea, and I'm blown away. So I actually kind of like teared up because I'm so proud of you.
I should have forwarded his Saturday night journals to you.
Yeah, I had no idea that you were working this hard and doing all this. Like, I knew you were working hard, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, and every Saturday, they had journals which were my eyes into the project outside the classroom. And they were very beneficial to keeping up and knowing what was going on.
Thank you for everything, for your guidance. And he's getting a great education here.
And again, for all the Capstone kids, I think the great thing about it is that, again, you kind of write your own curriculum, and there's a lot of flexibility, with yet some structure within it. And you get kind of the best of both worlds. And it's a great, cursor for college courses. And I always say, I told you guys this story all the time. I have college kids that write back to me and say, I'm in college and I'm doing a 10-minute presentation. It's a piece of cake when I have to stand up here and present at the end of the year for 45 minutes. And again, the work that all these kids have done, they could have stood up here for 2 hours talking about their projects. I mean, that's how much they put into it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on up.